Growing up, I always wanted to be a nature photographer, and I never really had the guts to try and make a career out of it. So I can't tell you how cool I find this topic and the opportunity to work with somebody like Tom Blagden, our speaker this evening, who is a professional in the field. So Tom is an accomplished nature photographer with over 40 years of experience in the field. His stunning images have graced the covers of renowned magazines such as Smithsonian, Audubon, and Nature Conservancy. His award-winning books, including those on Acadia and Grand Canyon National Park, reflect his deep commitment to land protection and conservation. Tom has dedicated his career to connecting people with the natural world through his work, and today he'll be sharing a presentation titled Great Mountain Forest, the Engaging Landscape, offering a glimpse into the forest's beauty and biodiversity. And we're incredibly grateful and lucky to have someone of Tom's talents and dedication using our forest as a way of expressing the beauty and wonder of nature and sharing its secrets. So please join me in welcoming Tom Blagden.
So, welcome everybody. It's wonderful to be among so many friends of Great Mountain Forest. I mean, in a sense, I feel like I'm really preaching to the choir, but let's think of it just as a celebration of Great Mountain Forest. I do want to say that every image you're going to see here this evening is genuinely from Great Mountain Forest. I mean, there's no fillers, there are no placebos, but there's no need to, because Great Mountain's got it all right there for us. First, I think I need to offer a little bit of a backstory, because pre-pandemic, I had just retired from 45 years of conservation photography. Those years were mostly based in Charleston, South Carolina, but the work was wide-ranging. And then Lynn and I had a chance to return to the old homestead in Northwest Connecticut, which goes back in the family about 85 years. And I have had so many great memories of the Northwest corner. And among them were countless ones in Great Mountain Forest, because I was virtually an adopted child of the Richard Childs family, and which was part of the greater Great Mountain Forest founding family. So their son Jamie was one of my best friends in youth, and he may be here this afternoon. But we spent a lot of time hiking, fishing, camping in Great Mountain Forest. So for us as kids, it was this vast wilderness playground. You know, and it just loomed large in our imaginations. So you fast forward from there to COVID and retirement, and Great Mountain Forest for me was the perfect antidote to being rudderless. I mean, I had no project obligations. I was a prisoner of pandemic isolation. So where else to go but Great Mountain Forest? The timing was perfect in terms of my own creative motivation, and also making, I hoped, a media contribution towards an increased awareness of Great Mountain Forest. I started slowly. I had to prove my worth, but the best part of it was I just felt this unprecedented sense of freedom. Again, almost no responsibilities during COVID. So GMF served both my isolation and my creative inspiration. But I could not have done it without the full support of GMF staff and trustees, who embraced and even facilitated all my efforts. So to them, I'm really, really grateful. Photography in Great Mountain Forest, 6,300 acres, is very challenging because it's a subtle landscape here with few bold features. But that landscape forces us to immerse ourselves in a more intimate way. and to follow paths to the unexpected. So for me, it's all about a sense of discovery in the moment. And after a while, those collective moments instill a sense of belonging and ownership. I rarely go out with a photo objective. It's more about just rambling around and letting the landscape reveal itself. But if there's an iconic destination in Great Mountain Forest, it's Old Man McMullen Pond, which I know many of you are familiar with, and especially its beautiful islands out in the middle. And when a place speaks to me, I just keep returning. I can't resist. So here again, you see that same theme of those McMullen Islands, but interpreted in different weather and light, expressing different moods. Or here, by different seasons on a crisp winter day. The McMullen Island in a blaze of autumn color. But lastly, this image was where it really came together. I was almost incredulous of the image itself, so I went back and checked the color. And I'd made 0 adjustments. This is exactly how the camera captured it. You know, those rare moments when just the saturation, the light, the moisture, everything comes off perfectly. McMullen Pond is full of old stumps, some of which comprise these mini islands in themselves. They harbor their own little micro communities. They're fascinating for me in that stumps are just so sculptural and expressive. Their form so organic. Here you see McMullen Pond again in late fall. Part of the challenge in nature photography is to see the landscape as comprised of relationships in a sort of visual ecology of different aesthetic elements. Exploring those relationships generates its own dynamic of visual literacy, which then generates our emotional connection to the natural world. It's the delight, not the devil, that's in the details. Here a damselfly, more delicate and slender than the previous dragonfly. These are mosquito-eating machines, so we like them around. Still at McMullen Pond, the mountain laurel in bloom, which has been our state flower since about 1907. And 2023 was just an incredible spring of blooms. I've never seen such a profusion. I mean, the shoreline of McMullen Pond you see here was just bursting in an explosion of blossoms. Almost every bush was in flower. But I like it when the buds are small and pink before they fully opened. And even though parts of the mountain laurel are poisonous, so it's not really edible, but it's an insect attractant nevertheless. Surprisingly, mountain laurel's an evergreen, retaining its leaves throughout the winter. Here you see Old Man McMullen in a fresh snow. Quite a different look. Great Mountain is an official National Weather Service station, and they've updated with a brand new station just this year. Here's an idyllic scene of McMullen Pond again with a fresh dusting of light snow. Yet it's deceptive, as last year, 2024, was one of the top 10 least snowy years. My wife Lynn enjoying winter serenity at Crissy Pond Overlook. Especially during COVID, Lynn and I relished our time together outdoors, much of it in Great Mountain. One of the more dramatic features of Great Mountain Forest are these ledges and rock outcroppings. And I love scrambling around these areas. They've endured the passage of time, and the plants, trees, and creatures must adapt to their permanence. In some places, you've got igneous granite, in others, metamorphic rock and sedimentary limestone. In spots on these ledges, great clefts are evident where the ledges have split apart over eons of time. But perhaps the most striking rocks are these glacial erratics, these huge boulders deposited from the Ice Age over 10,000 years ago. They stand alone as though just dropped out of nowhere, and I think they're truly a defining feature of our New England landscape. Some are even deposited upended, extending 20 feet skyward. An eastern spotted newt or red eft. Surprisingly, they can live for 12 to 15 years. But I know many of you encountered them because especially in spring after a rain, you can't walk a trail in Great Mountain Forest without watching every single footstep. There's so many of them. But this is the juvenile stage when you see them red or orange, and they spend 1 to 3 years on land. Eventually, they transform to look like this in their adult aquatic stage when they return to the ponds to lay eggs. Eye to eye with a leopard frog. This painted turtle had crawled out of Wampee Pond, possibly to try to lay eggs in the gravel roadbed. And I lay on my stomach. Of course, it withdrew its head. And I was about 15, 20 minutes on my stomach. Finally, its head came out. I got the shot. And I was so uncomfortable and stiff, I could barely move. And I hoisted myself up, turned around, and about 40 feet away, a bear was walking down the road right behind me. Fortunately, he had no idea what I was till I stood up, and he had the same reaction I did and took off. So that was a happy ending. I think we all recognize this guy, the porcupine, which is French for spiny pig. But they're found primarily in our northwest corner because it's the southernmost of their range. But these guys are one of the world's largest rodents, and they get a bad rap from foresters, understandably, because they gnaw on the trees and do some damage, especially to the bark. But you gotta admit, he's pretty cute. Their primary predators are fisher cats, coyotes, and bobcats. Hard to imagine attacking that thing. Another favorite pond of mine is Wapato, which is deep in off the number 4 trail. Here's just the simple textural shot of the shoreline of Wapato Pond with contrasting trees and colors. A rock island in Wapato with early morning frost on grass tussocks. I love reflections because they're really about pure light versus physical objects. And for me, these ephemeral moments are just as real, especially emotionally, as any physical object. And I'll talk a little bit more later on reflections. But Wapato, being so remote, is a haven for wildlife. Here you see 2 pairs of wood ducks.
What's the one on the far left?
2 males on the left, females on the right.
Ducks.
And here's the male taking flight. This is the inlet stream to Wapato Pond in peak autumn color. But this is that very same stream this fall, and it was almost dry. I mean, we had such a terrible drought this fall. I mean, 2023 was the second warmest year in the last 92 in Great Mountain Forest. But the low water drought had a few advantages for me because I could walk the shorelines where possible, looking for subtle textures and patterns. You know, it's all about trying to find a visual rhythm that keeps the eye exploring a scene. I'm sort of an old school purist, having worked with film most of my career. So digital was a really rough transition, but admittedly I love it now. But I mean, that said, there's still a discouraging impact of digital photography in that there's a loss of trust that the image is genuine, that it honestly represents what the photographer experienced. I mean, with film, you either got it or you didn't, you know, but the image itself was truer to the experience. Now, again, with digital, there's that loss of innocence to the extent that the viewer is now skeptical of the authenticity behind the photo, especially now with pervasive manipulation and artificial intelligence. I'll run quickly through some encounters with the wildflowers of Great Mountain Forest. And these represent just a minuscule selection of all that's out there. But here you see Canada lily, wild geranium, and this is the red or wake robin trillium. And interestingly, these are often in clusters, as you see here, because ants take the seeds into their nests underground, and will sometimes then they will germinate all together in a small cluster. Again, the wake robin trillium. This is a stinky flower, so imagine your dog soaking wet, and you pretty much got it. But it attracts carrion and beetles that pollinate it. This, believe it or not, is also a wake robin trillium, but the rare yellow form. And Jody Bronson found this flower and was kind enough to share it with me to photograph. And it turned out that this was the first and only record of this flower in the entire state of Connecticut. And once I knew what it was, I stumbled back deeper in my archives and found that 2 years prior, I'd photographed another specimen in a totally different location. So that was kind of fun. Our beautiful painted trillium. And the exotic pink lady slipper, which is a member of the orchid family. And lady slippers are very sensitive to habitat destruction and climate change. So it's always a treasure to find them in the Great Mountain Forest woods. With this close-up, same flower, but to me it just looks like some alien insect. And oddly enough, bees enter through that slit in the center bottom, thinking there's nectar, which is not. They're tricked. But once they're inside, they pollinate the flower in the process. Red columbine, which is one of my favorites. It's so delicate and beautiful. And also an important nectar source for hummingbirds and insects. The columbine are a nightmare to photograph because you can see those thread-thin stalks, which just never seem to stop moving in the wind. Here, an inverted blossom, like a fireworks going off. Red lobelia, or cardinal flower, collapsed in the stream current. Japanese primrose, which is not a native species. but still quite beautiful nevertheless. They occur mostly along the roadside and in damp, shady areas. Siberian squill by the old cemetery at the West Gate. These are a native to southwest Russia, Turkey, and Caucasus. And apparently much of the plant is poisonous. The higher elevations in Great Mountain Forest capture the early frosts and snow. Again, you kind of can clearly see that advantage of elevation, where down below lacks much of the snow and ice, but Great Mountain just gets it. The icebox of Connecticut. You know, when it's rained below, it's usually ice in Great Mountain Forest, which might have happened yesterday. It seemed like the conditions were perfect for it. Here's the Chattelton Main Road approaching the Camp Road intersect. But for me, you can't beat the combination of fall colors with a dusting of snow. The Great Mountain Forest Weather Station has collected data for over 90 years. But anecdotal observation is pretty obvious that there's just less and less snow in recent years. I mean, 6 out of 9 of the least snowy years have been in the last 20, according to GMF data. So I went out after this ice storm, but fortunately, Jody Bronson gave me some key advice right before, which was wear a helmet. And I'm not kidding. Sure enough, it hit the melting point, and huge chunks of ice were falling off the trees. And I had to evacuate. I mean, I couldn't even photograph, and there was shards bouncing off all over me. But winter carries the beauty of silence along with its monochrome simplicity. For those of you who cross-country ski, you know well, Great Mountain Forest is just a recreational treat. It's by far the best way to get around in winter. And I find I can cover surprising distances, even with some camera gear. I love the warm accent of the beech leaves in winter, which you saw as well in the previous image. But if beech leaf disease really hits us, it's a huge threat, and it's going to be such a major loss to lose these beautiful trees. Here's selective light on oak leaves with a falling snow. This has ended up being just one of my personal favorite shots of the winter. Old stone walls are throughout the forest, and they're a symbol of such a totally different landscape of a bygone era when forests were cleared for charcoal and pasture. Photographically, I love the energy of streams. They can be gentle and delicate, or wild and tumultuous, as you see here. But streams force me to be physically engaged and connected with all senses alert. And I think nature photography should be a physical endeavor. That's just part of the process. And it's bound to the creative process itself. But streams have the power to shape the topography. Here you see Wangam Brook, which flows out of the reservoir above Great Mountain Forest. This is the same approximate location, but in a different mood and a different season. But my all-time favorite stream in Great Mountain Forest is Brown Brook, which is the outflow of Wapato Pond. In July 2023, 6 to 12 inches of rain fell in 24 hours, and it blew out the beaver dam in Wapato Pond. I would have given anything to be there. I mean, I can't imagine what this scene here would have looked like in total flood stage as the pond virtually emptied 3/4 of its water. But Brown Brook is rough going, but I love the hiking up and down. And then there's so many rewards in this kind of radical topography. Last year was one of Great Mountain Forest's wettest years, despite the fall drought, which is kind of a contradiction. These are foam tentacles in a stream eddy, which was right next to the previous waterfall. The North Branch of Brown Brook is really just a mini version of its big brother. But it really doesn't take much of a stream to create a dramatic scene in such a dynamic surrounding context. A shattered streamside stump speaks for forces other than the water itself. Streams fascinate me, especially when partially frozen before snowfall.
When you take a picture like that, not meaning to interrupt, but you've got a still life there. But do you have your finger on your shutter longer to allow for that streaming look?
Yeah, typically the shutter speeds are slow enough. The question was if I'm interpreting, probably the softness of the water that you see in some images, and that's just a slow shutter speed.
Okay, because all the other things like the rocks and everything are dead on.
Or static, yeah. But I like that softness of the water, which you kind of see here as well.
Okay,
And,
answer my question.
My favorite is evident here. It's just where the rocks in the ground are visible, but they're ornamented by accumulated frozen mists and droplets of water. I mean, ice is a hard structure, yet it's so ephemeral. I mean, it kind of epitomizes that frozen moment in time. But yet, ice too is constantly evolving. It's never the same twice. And sometimes you see these bizarre shapes with static, strange forms juxtaposed to the moving water. Going back to the 2023 weather data, there were only 2 days in single digits and 1 day below zero the entire winter. So, I mean, climate change is here. There's no ducking it. I spend a lot of time looking up, which you've already seen in some of the other snow photographs. But I like that perspective because it somehow makes us feel small and vulnerable. Looking up imposes a sense of scale. It dislocates us from our normal viewpoint, and trees become the dominant factor. Looking straight up pulls us skyward. The convergent lines levitate us up with the trees themselves. I love abstractions because the fun part is that in photography, they begin with objective reality, yet the image denies or transcends that object identity. They offer an intimate glimpse into a detailed world we may not have noticed. Often these abstractions are really extractions, pulling details out of an identifiable context. Reflections always fascinate me visually. I mean, with them, we look down in order to look up. And here you see a layering of both the physical and the representational. Reflections are about pure light and water's ability to reinterpret the object world. And this was just an accidental serendipity of the moment. But those are the fun surprises. Sometimes I like to play with the unpredictable, employing camera motion and multiple exposure. Here's a similar approach with floating leaves and rotating the camera. Another multiple exposure, moving the camera vertically. Or a single slow motion exposure, also moving the camera. Now, I have to admit that these creative approaches are really for my own entertainment, when not much else is going on. But there's always something out there. Chicken of the woods, one of our more edible fungi. I'm not good at identifying fungi, but you have to marvel at the complex symbiotic relationships with the plants and trees around them. And I believe you all heard about that in the last talk here, which unfortunately I missed. And if you look closely here on this mushroom, I think a mouse has gnawed at some of the gills on the underside. Here you see Crissy Pond, which is a favorite destination of mine in Great Mountain Forest. Crissy is loaded with water lilies, which are always an intriguing theme. This one was uprooted probably by beavers or muskrats. Here, a subsurface view of a white water lily, which for me was sort of an attempt to capture the same feeling as with the trees looking up in the forest. Reaching up for light and air, exposing the blossoms. A single white water lily among mountain laurel reflections. Crissy Pond has these boggy edges and shoreline. And here you see a carnivorous sundew, which was related to the Venus flytrap. And they have these sticky secretions on the end of the lobes that capture the insects, which they then devour. Purple pitcher plant, which is our only species of pitcher plant in New England, but it thrives in these peat bogs and around Crissy. Here's a dragonfly's final molt on the pitcher plant blossom. And you're seeing here just the larval skins and the exoskeleton. The nectar on the lip of the pitcher plant attracts insects who then fall in to be dissolved. So this is kind of a close-up of the interior of the pitcher plant, and you can even see the downward pointing hairs which help trap the insects inside. They're really right out of a science fiction movie. But I had a real surprise when I was looking for the pitcher plants, which was the discovery of this other bog resident, the Arethusa orchid. And that really was a thrill, because this is an endangered or threatened flower throughout much of the eastern United States. And I'd only found it twice before in other locations outside of Great Mountain. So I was really excited to stumble on these. And you can see here where it gets its nickname, dragon mouth. Speaking of dragon mouth, the northern water snake, they've got a bad attitude, but at least they're not venomous. And this is the classic view from the Crissy Pond overlook, which is one of the most beautiful elevation scenes in all of Great Mountain Forest. And Crissy again in a panorama of autumn blaze. A great blue heron on Crissy Pond, which is one of our remarkably adaptable wading birds. And interestingly, the numbers of great blues have increased along with beaver-created habitats, which have improved the number of wetlands. Speaking of, here's my favorite resident of GMF's ponds and wetlands. I love the touch of the dragonfly probably trying to land on his head. But these beaver are territorially aggressive. And they were almost completely eliminated in the mid-1800s, and then they were reintroduced in the 1920s and 30s. And they've thrived with all our regenerated forest land. To the extent that the state now allows trapping, and we have more beaver than in the last 300 years. But I was determined to try and photograph the famous tail slap, and I was always ending up with this. And it's quicker than the human reflex, or at least my reflex. I just couldn't get it. So I just started firing at any swimming beaver, and just letting the frames go and hoping, and occasionally I got lucky, such as you see here. And here, but more often than not, it was 200 frames of nothing but a swimming beaver. But this gives you an idea of how huge that tail is. And when it goes off, slapping the water, it's like a gunshot, especially when it was right next to me. And sometimes they would sneak up if I wasn't paying attention on the shore and let her rip. There are few commanding views from the heights in Great Mountain Forest, but Stone Man Mountain offers one of the best at an elevation of almost 1,800 feet. It's another world up there with this distinctive and special subalpine habitat of mosses and lichens. Here you see sunrise at the summit of Stone Man on an early autumn morning. And peak autumn colors on Stone Man of blueberry and stunted oak. Only from these heights can you get views of the forest canopy, which to me are fascinating because they show the tapestry of the different trees. The varied proportions of hardwoods and conifers. Another view from above is the Matterhorn. And here you see extensive hardwoods surrounding the pines. A panorama of Wampee Pond, deep on the number 4 trail. A big part of Great Mountain Forest biodiversity are its wetland depressions. And I love walking around them and bogging down in the middle of them. But they just hold this treasure trove of mosses and moisture-dependent plants. Among them, ferns, which are a favorite theme for me, for their delicacy and their pattern. So I'm always trying to find that visual rhythm and let that dictate the composition. The graceful beauty of the form and texture of their fronds. And here, a different texture of early spring emerging ferns. Or that very same location and same ferns in autumn. I'm going to run through a quick compilation of some of the birds I've encountered. Here you see ring-necked ducks, the yellow warbler singing his little heart out in spring, American redstart, common yellowthroat. May is definitely the best time when the migration's at its peak. A black-throated green warbler, And also in spring, their plumage is in peak color along with their vocalizations. A black and white warbler hunting insects in the tree bark. Raven. Ravens are one of my favorite birds. And I rarely saw them in my youth, and they're quite common now. Cedar waxwing. This eastern phoebe was on a nest at Old Man McMullen Pond, and some of you may know this nest, but it's been active every year I've gone, and probably well before that. So it's just like a treat to see it every spring and thriving. Tree swallow, superb aerial acrobats. Yes, our good old turkey vulture, not to be overlooked. But what fascinates me, I mean, they're beautiful in flight, and especially if I can get a perspective from above looking down, sort of more of a bird's perspective, which I can really only achieve around Chrissy and Wapato overlooks. I believe a red-shouldered hawk, juvenile, some of you may know better, gets a little tricky for me to identifying these younger hawks. Another red-shouldered. A broadwing hawk. No introduction needed. A male common grackle hunting along the shore of McMullen Pond. Wildlife is just so random in Great Mountain Forest. I really have no alternative but to just kind of stagger around with a large telephoto lens and hope for that brief lucky encounter. The good news is there's an exciting increase in most wildlife species. I mean, so successfully that the deer have to be culled just for forest resiliency. For a long time, this was as close as I came to seeing a bear, even though numerous ones were frequenting my front lawn, but that's a whole separate story. I couldn't get rid of them. So in desperation, I set up a camera trap, and at some point, this timid bear popped his head out, and I got the shot. But then, more importantly, to my absolutely surprise, in the same spot, this moose cow wandered through, and it must have heard the camera go off, because otherwise it would have been broadside. And she walked right up to the camera. I mean, moose weren't in GMF prior till about 2002. And one day I got an alert from Russell Russ, and I dashed to Wampee Pond, where this sight greeted me. And this cow was just chilling with the wood ducks. And I hung in there for 3 hours in heat and insects, thinking, oh, she's going to stand up and start feeding, get the classic head dunk feed shot. No, she just lay there and finally just jumped up and wandered off. But for me, this was the holy grail of what I was hoping to get at some point was a big bull moose. And so I set a camera trap on one of the trails just this fall, and this big fella wandered through. So now, as most of you probably know, there are supposedly somewhere between 20 and 30 moose in Great Mountain Forest area. But then, surprisingly, that same spot, same day, just a couple of hours later, this bear wandered through. Only like the moose, he should have been broadside, but he heard the camera clicking and had a certain attitude. So he's coming right up to the camera, This was the next shot of his nose. His nose against the lens. And then he totally mauled my camera. Tooth marks, claw marks. Anyway, this is Camp Pond, which many of you may not know, because it's accessed primarily on a spur off the Charcoal Pit Trail. But it has this signature rock island, which has sort of become the dominant theme for me, kind of like the islands in McMullen Pond. But access everywhere else on the pond is difficult. So I return frequently just to this feature, exploring it in different conditions. But much of nature photography depends on knowing a place so well that you can anticipate how it looks in different seasons, different light, different weather. There's a great quote by the nature writer Barry Lopez, to the effect of which, once it strive to know the landscape so well that you wear it like clothing. So here's the lord of that same rock, that very same rock. And I think if wrinkles were indicative of old age, he's got a lot of years on us. So in closing, I'd just like to say that nature photography at its best has the potential to assign a higher value to place, to broaden our sensibilities to the marvels and mysteries within. My hope is that these images help foster a deeper vision, and with it a deeper bond to Great Mountain Forest. The late David Leff, former GMF trustee, has a pertinent quote which appeared just recently in GMF's Christmas card, and it's worth repeating here. Leff said, "There is something seductive and rare about feeling alone in the middle of nowhere, on entering a place vast enough to almost frighten with the possibility of losing oneself, yet small enough to know well. Few enter Great Mountain Forest without intimations of awe." Well, that pretty well sums up the Great Mountain Forest experience. We hear a lot these days about rewilding, restoring habitats, and introducing species. But I'd like to propose that we concentrate on rewilding ourselves and seek a renewed connection to nature's intrinsic qualities. We can be citizen scientists, or at the very least, citizen wanderers. But for me, GMF, it's our hallowed ground. It's really one of our crown jewels. And I've thrown a lot of photographs at you tonight, but my photography is still very much a work in progress. We're all in this together to make sure that the land legacy the Childs and Walcott families have bestowed upon us continues. So I truly appreciate being able to share that sense of awe with you tonight, and hope it inspires us not only to be boots on the ground, but loyal ambassadors and maybe even stewards of Great Mountain Forest. So thank you all for hanging in there.
Just want to thank Tom. Thank you. Just want to thank Tom. Thank you all. I think we have time for a couple of questions if folks want to raise their hands.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Oh, there. Okay. I can't see them.
And I take it's not film, it's a chip.
Yeah, everything. The question was, what camera do I use? Everything you saw is digital. I've used my entire career. Thank you. Just like I appreciate that. Just like divergence into medium format with the Mamiya system.
So it's tough to get films, not films, right?
Yeah, everything, what, the question was what
I
camera
know
do I
where to
use?
look.
Everything
I
is
think
all
it's
still
all
out there.
digital.
And interestingly, I'm hearing the question was still, this film's still alive, and I am hearing about more and more resurgence, divergence into medium format, particularly in academics at the school. So I'm all for that. Yeah, Jeremy.
If you know where to look,
I think it's all still out there. And interestingly, I'm hearing the question was this film's still alive, and I am hearing about more and more resurgence of film use. I'm not sure. I'm really winging it at the school. So, well, again, I'm going to contradict myself because you asked what I use. Yeah, Jeremy. Basically, Nikon's 99%. For underwater, I have a little Sony in the housing, and I'm shooting blind, so I'm just like sticking my arm on it. I'm not sure. I'm really winging it. So, well, again, I'm almost tipping over, contradict myself because you asked what I use. Anyway, basically, Nikon's 99%. For underwater, I have a little Sony in the housing, and I'm shooting blind, so I'm just like sticking my arm on the wall. I'm not diving. I'm almost tipping over. Yeah, the question was, which I think you heard, was just sort of the pace of functioning. I tend to keep moving, but really slowly. Where I have unbound patience is if I sense something is happening, which tends to be more with wildlife. Yeah, the question, I mean, like that moose, which I think you heard, was just sort of the pace of, I mean, that tortured me, but I was determined. I tend to, it's just too good, really slowly. But where I have unbound patience is if I sense something, but that's where the patience is happening, which tends to be more with wildlife. One more, I mean, like that moose in Wampee Pond. I mean, that tortured me, but I was determined. It's just too good. She didn't want to. Most of them are pretty much the crop of the photo. Yeah, that's just patience here or there. Because sometimes, I mean, I'm so conscious of getting one more composition the way I want it that the proportions of the frame don't always exactly interpret what I want. But on the other hand, you learn. I'm so programmed. I see in terms of most of them are pretty much the crop of the photo. Yeah, maybe just like here or there. Because sometimes, anyway, thank you so.
If there's something like